The slave who wasn't supposed to matter. The sky above Rilvek 3 was always the same, dark, dusty, and filled with ash. The sun here was weak, barely more than a pale glow behind thick clouds. Nothing green grew on this moon. There were no trees, no rivers, no birds. Just rocks, machines, and slaves. Kira was one of those slaves. She woke every morning to the sound of the sirens, harsh, loud, and cruel, just like everything on Rilvek 3. Her small hands were already scarred, her back sore from carrying mining tools all day. She didn't know how long she had been there. Months? Years? It didn't matter. Time was something, for free people. Not for her. She didn't even know her real name. Kira was what another slave had called her once before he disappeared. That name was the only thing she had left that felt like hers. The Dominion, an empire of cruel alien overlords, owned the mines, and they owned her. The guards wore silver armor and carried whips that hummed with energy. They didn't speak to the slaves. They shouted orders, and if someone didn't obey fast enough, they were punished or taken away. No one ever came back. The slaves weren't allowed to talk to each other much, but sometimes they whispered at night. Some believed in freedom. Others had given up. Most were just trying to stay alive one more day. Kira tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope got you noticed. And getting noticed meant pain. But then, everything changed. It happened during the midday shift. Kira was deep in the tunnels, working with a dull laser cutter, when the ground suddenly shook. The walls cracked. Alarms screamed. Something big had hit the surface. Guards rushed by, shouting in their strange language. One of them grabbed Kira by the arm and threw her back toward the slave quarters. "Move," he growled. Outside, smoke was rising into the sky. Black smoke, heavy and thick like something had crashed from orbit. That night, Kira couldn't sleep. She sat in the corner of the sleeping cell, staring at the cracks in the wall. She didn't know why she couldn't stop thinking about the explosion. Curiosity burned in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She waited until the guards changed shifts. Then she slipped out. She moved like a shadow through the tunnels. She had learned to walk quietly, to avoid the cameras, to blend in. She followed the smoke until she reached the outer ridge of the mining compound. What she saw made her heart stop. A ship, or what was left of one. It had crashed hard. Pieces were everywhere. Flames flickered in the rubble. Most of it was scrap, but in the middle, half buried under metal and dust, was something impossible. A human. She had never seen one in real life, only heard stories. Stories of strange-looking creatures from faraway planets. Rumors said humans were wild, dangerous. Some slaves even said they were monsters. But the man lying there didn't look like a monster. He looked broken. His suit was torn. Blood stained his side. His breathing was slow and weak. One eye was swollen shut and his arm was bent the wrong way. Kira took a step back. She should leave. If a guard found her here, she would be punished. Worse, they would kill the man. Maybe they already knew he was here. But still. She didn't move. She looked at his face. Dirty. Tired. But not cruel. Something in her chest, deep and old, told her to help him. She crept closer. He didn't wake. Carefully, she pulled away part of the wreckage from his legs. He groaned but didn't open his eyes. Kira looked around. No one was there. She whispered, "Don't die," even though she wasn't sure if he could understand. Somehow, she managed to pull him into a broken supply tunnel. It took all her strength. Her arms shook and her legs nearly gave out, but she didn't stop. She dragged him into a forgotten maintenance room, one the guards hadn't used in years. It was small, dark, and full of dust, but it was hidden. The man was burning with fever. He whispered things in his own language, words she didn't know. She brought him water from the leaking pipes. She tore strips of cloth from her own clothes to stop his bleeding. She sat beside him and watched his chest rise and fall. She didn't know why she was doing this. He was human, a stranger. But for the first time in her life, she was making a choice, a real choice. She had seen too many people die, too many beaten down and thrown away. But this man, he was a fighter. She could feel it. Maybe he could fight for her too. A deal in the shadows. The room was cold, not from the air. It was always dry and stale on Rilvek 3, but from the silence. Deep silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Kira sat on the metal floor beside the human, watching his chest move up and down. It was slower now. He was alive, but just barely. She didn't sleep that night. She just watched him, half expecting him to stop breathing. Part of her was scared he would die. Another part was scared he wouldn't, and then she wouldn't know what to do next. By morning, his eyes finally opened. One eye was swollen shut, but the other was clear, bright green, alert. He looked around in confusion, then at her. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two strangers from two worlds trapped together in a place no one wanted to be. He tried to speak, but only coughed. Kira reached out, offering him the last bit of water in the old cup she'd found. He stared at it, then at her, then took a slow sip. His hands shook. When he could finally talk, his voice was rough, like sandpaper. "Where am I?" She didn't answer. She didn't know his words. But something in his tone, soft but serious, made her lean forward, curious. He tried again. "Who are you?" She pointed to herself. "Kira." He blinked, then pointed at his own chest. "Dax. Sergeant Dax Mercer." The way he said it sounded like it mattered, but Kira just nodded. Names were rare in the mines. Most slaves were just numbers. Kira and Dax already felt like something special. Over the next hours, maybe days, they tried to speak. He would point to things, say the word, and she would repeat it. Water, fire, pain, help. The words came slowly, but they came. They were building a bridge, one word at a time. He asked her if there were guards nearby. She nodded. He asked if she could get him out. She hesitated, and then he made her an offer. He pointed at the sky, then at himself. "Human ship," he said, making a flying motion with his hand. "Come back. Rescue." He looked at her seriously. "Help me. And I help you." Kira didn't move. Her eyes narrowed. She'd heard promises before, even some from other slaves who only wanted to save themselves. But there was something different in his face. Something tired, honest, and desperate. He wasn't a liar, he was a soldier, and he was alone. Kira stood and walked to the corner of the room. There, hidden under a loose metal plate, were a few stolen tools and scraps she had collected over the years. She had never dared use them before, never had a reason, but now, she brought them out and dropped them beside him. He smiled. Not a full smile, but a small one. The kind that says, "Thank you," without needing words. Over the next few days, she helped him heal. She stole bandages, scraps of food, even a small battery to recharge part of his armor. In return, Dax taught her things. He showed her how to hold a weapon, how to move quietly, how to fight back if someone grabbed her. It wasn't much, but to Kira, it felt like the beginning of something bigger. They made a plan. Dax said there was a shuttle bay near the edge of the compound. If they could reach it, he might be able to call for help. Kira had been near it once during a supply run. She remembered the codes the guards used. Together, they sketched a path on the wall using broken wires and dust, but it wasn't just about escape anymore. One night, while checking the door for patrols, Kira whispered something she hadn't said in years. "I don't want to run." Dax looked up from the makeshift weapon he was building. What? She touched her neck, where the slave mark had been burned into her skin. They hurt us, all of us, every day. Her voice shook, but not from fear. If we leave, they'll just bring more. Dax stared at her. He didn't understand every word, but he understood enough. She wasn't just asking for freedom, she wanted to fight back. He sighed and leaned against the wall. You want to hit them where it hurts? She nodded. He closed his eyes, then opened them again. Then we'll need more than a way out. We'll need a miracle. She looked at him with calm eyes. Then we make one. And just like that, a human soldier and an alien slave, two people the galaxy had forgotten, became something more. They became a team. They became dangerous, and the Dominion had no idea what was coming. The escape they never saw coming. It started with darkness. Not the soft kind that comes before sleep, but the heavy, tense kind. The kind that wraps around you like a storm waiting to break. Kira crouched in the old access tunnel beside Dax, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. The silence between them was loud. The moment they moved, there'd be no turning back. For 3 days, they had prepared in secret. Kira had memorized guard patterns, stolen scraps from maintenance bots, and created distractions that caused just enough confusion to open small cracks in the schedule. Dax, still weak from his wounds, had turned broken tools and old power cells into something that resembled a weapon, ugly, loud, but deadly. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and they had purpose. The guards never expected anything from the slaves. That was their weakness. They believed fear would last forever. They believed control was absolute. They were wrong. Kira gave one last look down the tunnel, then nodded. It was time. They moved like shadows. Kira led the way, slipping through maintenance shafts and forgotten side paths that only slaves knew existed. Dax followed, his limp still present but his aim steady. Every sound made her flinch, every hiss of steam, every flicker of a broken light. But they didn't stop. They reached the first checkpoint faster than expected. 2 guards stood there, half asleep, tapping their energy batons against the wall. Kira ducked behind a broken pipe. Her breathing was sharp, shallow. She turned to Dax, pointing to the left. He raised his weapon. No words were spoken. The shot was quick and silent. Just a soft thump of pressurized air and a flash of blue. One guard dropped. The other reached for his communicator. Kira moved before she could think. She was fast. Too fast for the alien to react. She slammed the butt of a pipe into his face, once, twice, until he collapsed. Her arms trembled afterward, but she didn't let go of the pipe. Dax looked at her with something like pride but also worry. You all right? She nodded. Yes, but inside, she wasn't sure. They dragged the bodies into a supply closet and kept moving. Every hallway felt like a test. The Dominion had eyes everywhere, drones, scanners, AI security. But Kira knew this place. She had walked these halls for years. She knew where the blind spots were. She had been invisible all her life. Now it was finally useful. They reached the main data room just before the change of shift. This was where the real risk began. The terminal inside controlled internal doors, power systems, and emergency locks. If they could override it, they could open a path to the landing bay, but that meant breaking into a system designed by the Dominion, the most advanced empire in this part of the galaxy. Dax connected a cable from his cracked gauntlet to the console. Sparks flickered. The screen glitched. Kira watched over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing. Something strange happened. The screen flashed not just in symbols but in a language she somehow understood. Not fully, but enough. She leaned forward, her fingers moving over the keys. Lines of code opened like doors. Security gates dropped. Alarms paused for a moment. Just long enough. Dax stared at her. How are you doing that? She didn't know. But something inside her felt like it had been waiting. Like she wasn't just using the system, she was speaking to it. Later she would remember the feeling as the moment everything changed. But for now, they had a window. 12 minutes. They ran, through open gates, down echoing halls, past stunned workers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. A slave girl and a human soldier, armed fast and unafraid. A drone spotted them. Dax fired without hesitation. Kira slammed a security door shut behind them with a flick of the console. The landing bay loomed ahead, wide and cold, filled with transport ships and Dominion guards. Too many. They didn't hesitate. They couldn't. The firefight was chaos. Dax fought like a man with nothing left to lose, each shot clean, each move precise. Kira ducked low, sliding under beams and crates, flipping switches, unlocking barriers. Explosions echoed, sirens screamed. The Dominion guards scrambled, unprepared for resistance, much less a full escape. They reached the ship, one of the smaller transports, barely fueled, old and worn. But it could fly. Dax ran to the controls. Kira turned to follow him, and was yanked back by a rough hand, a guard. She struggled, kicked, clawed, but he was too strong. He lifted her off the ground, snarling something in his language, then he stopped. A loud crack echoed in the bay. Dax stood behind him, smoking rifle in hand. The guard dropped, but it was too late. The delay cost them. More troops poured in. Dozens. Kira screamed something at Dax, words not in English, but he understood. Go! She shoved him toward the ship, and then she did something no one expected. She ran the other way, back into the complex. She had made a promise. To him, and to herself. If this was just about escape, she could have left already. But she wasn't done yet. The turn, Kira's awakening, the door slammed shut behind her, sealing with a hiss of pressurized air. Kira stood alone now, the distant echo of gunfire behind her and a quiet, humming darkness ahead. She had never been in this part of the compound before. It was forbidden even to the guards. Slaves whispered about it, something deep underground, where machines were said to think, where the Dominion's true power lived. They called it the core. No one ever came back from the core. Kira moved slowly through the hallway. The walls were smooth, seamless metal. No cracks, no rust, no signs of life. Cold light pulsed in the floor beneath her feet, blue and steady, like a heartbeat. Her breath fogged in the air. The temperature was dropping, yet she felt no fear. Not anymore. Something was pulling her forward. A door slid open without her touching it. She stepped through into a wide, circular chamber. In the center stood a massive black structure, tall and humming, covered in glowing lines that shifted like veins beneath a surface of glass. The Dominion's AI core. She should have turned and run. She should have been afraid. But instead she walked toward it. The lights brightened as she approached. Then without warning the machine spoke. Not in the harsh Dominion tongue, but in a soft, almost familiar voice. Female. Calm. Cold. Unit 7A1. Genetic signature confirmed. Welcome, Prototype Kira. Kira froze. Prototype? The voice continued. System reactivation authorized. Neural. Pathway stable. Awaiting command input. Her hands trembled. Her knees nearly buckled. She had never asked who she really was. She had never thought she could be anything but a slave. She had accepted the pain, the silence, the chains. But now everything twisted. Prototype. She touched the glowing surface of the machine and it came alive. Files opened in the air. Images, diagrams, logs. She saw a lab. She saw herself, younger, connected to wires, her eyes wide with confusion. She saw scientists, Dominion researchers, arguing over her code, her design. Words she didn't understand flashed across the air. Cognitive uplink, organic interface, adaptive AI compatibility. She wasn't just another prisoner. She was built. Not to serve, but to control. The Dominion had made her to interface with their machines, to act as a living key to their systems, a bridge between code and flesh, a tool for war. But they had buried her, hidden her in the mines. She was too unstable. they had said. Too emotional, too human. She sank to her knees, tears filling her eyes, but they didn't fall. Her face stayed hard, still, quiet. All her life they had tried to break her, but they had never erased the fire inside. Now she understood why the console had obeyed her, why the codes made sense, why the AI had listened. She wasn't their tool anymore. She was something they couldn't control, and she would use what they built to destroy them. Kira stood and placed her hands on the core's surface. Her fingers glowed faintly, her skin responding to the interface like it had been waiting all this time. Lines of light wrapped around her arms, her spine, her temples. Pain spiked through her body, but she didn't pull away. She didn't scream. She took control. The facility's systems began to fail. Cameras turned black, lights died, doors unlocked across the compound. The AI stuttered, confused. For the first time, something inside the Dominion machine hesitated. Command override, detected. Origin, Unit 7A1. Error. Loyalty protocol corrupt. Kira's voice was low, calm, cold. Not an error. She sent one final command. Burn everything. Across the mining base, chaos broke out. Doors flew open. Explosives hidden by rebels. In secret cracks detonated. Turrets turned on their masters. Slaves who had cowered in the dark now found gates open and guards fleeing. In the landing bay, Dax paused as fire spread through the station. Alarms rang out, but not in warning. In surrender. He looked toward the corridor where she had vanished. A shape emerged from the smoke. It was her. Eyes glowing faintly blue, skin marked by faint lines of data, her steps slow but strong. The core had changed her, not her soul, but her body. Enhanced, empowered, awakened. He ran to her, caught her before she fell. Her voice was weak but steady. I opened every door. Yeah, he said, breathless. I noticed. Behind them, the station collapsed, systems failing one by one as the AI core melted down from within. Kira had done more than escape. She had started a rebellion. The stand, one girl, one human, and the fall of a fortress. The wind on Rilvec 3 had changed. It wasn't natural. There were no oceans here, no storms, no seasons. But the air carried something new now. Not just smoke and fire from the burning. Compound, but something deeper. A feeling. A pulse. Like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast had just begun to stir. And it was angry. The mining facility was collapsing, system by system. Kira's override had turned the Dominion's fortress into a crumbling husk. Doors failed. Lights died. Automated security bots attacked anything in uniform. What had once been a symbol of control was now a battlefield lit by fire and chaos. Kira stood at the heart of it all. Her legs barely held her. Her hands still trembled from the connection to the AI core. Her mind was burning, echoes of code and data flashing in her skull like lightning. But she didn't fall. She had gone too far to stop now. Dax was beside her, pulling her upright as an explosion rocked the wall behind them. A drone dive-bombed, screeching its alarm, but he shot it mid-air, sending shards flying. He looked at her, and for a second she saw real fear in his eyes. Not fear of her, fear for her. Kira, he said, voice low, almost pleading. You don't have to keep pushing. She shook her head. Yes, I do. They moved fast, through burning corridors and shattered halls. Their goal wasn't just escape anymore. They were heading to the main relay tower, the central hub for all Dominion communications on the moon. If they could reach it, they could send a signal off-world. Not just a distress call, but a warning. A message. A strike. Kira's plan was simple. Tell the galaxy what happened here. Tell them that the slaves had names, that one of them fought back, that a human helped her. The tower loomed ahead, tall and black, its structure surrounded by Dominion enforcers. The last line of defense. They were better trained, better armed, and furious. The system had failed, and they were here to erase the proof. Kira didn't stop. She walked straight into gunfire. Dax shouted, but she raised her hand, and the Dominion's own turrets turned. She had kept a sliver of the AI inside her mind, a key, a ghost, a whisper of control. It wouldn't last. It burned her from within. But it was enough. The turrets roared, and soldiers screamed. Dax charged in behind her, covering her flanks. He fought like a man with nothing left to prove, each bullet a promise. Kira moved like something half machine, half myth, every step more than she had ever been allowed to take. The ground shook. The sky turned orange with rising fire. And at the base of the relay tower, she found the central interface. She dropped to her knees and pressed her hand to it. The machine responded instantly, like it had been waiting. The screen opened to her. Thoughts. Options flashed by. Send message. Activate beacon. Overload station. She chose all of them, one by one. The tower lit up like a star being born. Across the galaxy, Dominion command centers flickered. Slave camps on nearby planets went dark. Security AIs froze. Something had gone wrong. Something small. Something impossible. A human and a slave had lit a fire. As Kira finished the override, the system demanded a name, not a code, not a designation, a name. She typed it slowly, with shaking fingers. Kira. Then she stood and watched the tower send out the signal, a scream across the stars, not in fear, but in defiance. The last of the Dominion soldiers tried to rush them as the tower's engines overloaded. Dax turned, raising his rifle, but Kira stopped him. The machine exploded behind her, sending a shockwave through the entire valley. The blast knocked the soldiers back. The tower was gone, and so was the Dominion's grip on Rilvec 3. For a long moment, there was only silence. No orders, no alarms, no commands. The control was broken. Slaves from the lower mines climbed to the surface, blinking in the light. They looked around, confused, scared, free, and standing among the fire and ruin were two figures, blackened by ash, marked by war, but standing tall. Kira and Dax. One was once a soldier, the other was never meant to matter. Together, they had brought down a fortress. Together, they had started a revolution. The aftermath, the galaxy watches. It took 2 full days for the fires to die. Rilvec 3, once a silent moon under Dominion control, now smoldered with broken towers, blackened steel, and shattered command centers. The winds carried ash instead of commands, silence instead of screams. For the first time in living memory, the air wasn't filled with the sound of whips, sirens, or marching boots. It was filled with questions. Across the compound, former slaves wandered like ghosts. Their chains were gone, but the weight remained. Some stared at the sky as if seeing it for the first time. Others still hid behind broken walls, afraid it was all a trick. Freedom wasn't something you could just hand to someone, especially not after a life of being told you were nothing. But change had come, and it had a name. Kira. She didn't speak much in the hours after the tower fell. Her body was weak. The AI link had burned through parts of her memory like fire on old paper. Her hand still sparked occasionally, as if pieces of the machine still pulsed beneath her skin. Dax never left her side. He kept guard with tired eyes and a broken arm wrapped in blood-stained cloth. He said little, but his presence told everyone else. She wasn't just someone who had survived this. She had caused it, chosen it, fought for it, and she wasn't alone. By the 3rd day, the signal she'd sent out reached human space, and the Galaxy listened. The footage from the Dominion's own surveillance drones was undeniable. A slave girl, enhanced by Dominion tech breaking into the core, a lone human soldier covering her escape, internal systems turning on their masters, the fall of a mining compound that had stood untouched for nearly 40 years. Earth's leaders weren't ready for what they saw. The Dominion had kept human forces at the edge of the Obsidian Rim, claiming peace, trade, and stability. But what Kira and Dax had uncovered proved otherwise. Behind the trade deals and hollow treaties were chains, camps, experiments, slavery, and now the lie was unraveling. The human response was swift, but not loud. No grand speeches, no declarations of war. Just quiet signals, coded transmissions, mobilization. Fleets that had sat idle were given new routes. Special ops units disappeared into the dark. The Dominion saw it, of course. They labeled Kira a rogue weapon, a failed prototype, a mistake. They said Dax was a deserter, a war criminal, a terrorist. But neither of them cared. Kira watched the sky each night, sitting by a shattered pillar near the cliff's edge. She said nothing, just stared at the stars above, knowing her signal was still traveling, reaching others like her. Not just slaves, not just rebels, people who were forgotten, people who had waited for a sign. Dax sat beside her most nights, sharpening a bent piece of metal that had once been a drone's leg. "They're gonna come," he'd say, not knowing if he meant Earth or the Dominion. Maybe both. Kira would nod. "They'll try to take this place back." She would nod again. "Are we ready?" And finally, she would speak. Just 2 words. Soft. Certain. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. They had started something bigger than themselves. The slaves in the mines were organizing, building, watching the stars, waiting for the next move. Other camps were beginning to whisper about Rilvec 3. Some even dared to hope. The Dominion's silence only made it worse for them. They didn't know how to control a story like this because Kira wasn't a weapon anymore. She was a symbol of what happens when the smallest voice refuses to stay silent, of what a single act of defiance can do, of what happens when a forgotten girl reaches inside the machine meant to destroy her and rewrites the code. Dax didn't understand the full scope of what they'd done yet. But he didn't need to. He had seen her walk through fire. He had seen her turn pain into purpose. And now, as the stars shifted and ships began to stir in distant space, he knew something bigger was coming. They hadn't won a war, but they had started one. Legacy. When the weak refused to bow, the stars were silent, but they watched. Above Rilvec 3, the sky was no longer a prison ceiling. It was a canvas, endless and wide, where the future had begun to take shape. And beneath that vast, watchful sky, aboard a human stealth cruiser orbiting the ruined moon, Kira stood before her reflection. She didn't recognize the girl in the glass. The dirt was gone, the bruises healed, but the marks were deeper now, etched in the way she held her shoulders, in the sharpness of her gaze. She wasn't just a slave who survived. She was someone the galaxy had tried to erase, and failed. Behind her, the hum of the cruiser's engines whispered in harmony with the soft rhythm of her breath. Everything here was polished, quiet, disciplined, not like the chaos of the mines. But even now, surrounded by advanced tech and clean walls, Kira didn't feel comfortable. She didn't trust peace. Not yet. Not when others were still in chains. The door slid open behind her. Dax entered, now in fresh combat gear, his uniform stripped of insignias. Officially, he didn't exist anymore. Earth's leaders had buried his record and erased his name from the system. Traitor to some, hero to others. But to Kira, he was the first person who had ever seen her as more than a number. He handed her a datapad. "Transmission from the outer colonies," he said. "2 more camps revolted. Used your signal. Your name." Kira didn't smile, but her eyes lit just a little. "They followed," she said. "They remembered." Dax nodded. "They're not just following you anymore, Kira. They're organizing. They're asking what's next." The question sat between them like gravity. What's next? Rilvec 3 had been just the first crack. Now the wall was starting to crumble. The Dominion, still massive, had grown cautious, pulling back fleets, tightening their borders, scrambling to patch the lie that had held for generations. But fear doesn't stop a story, and the story of the girl who broke her programming was spreading. Kira walked to the center of the ship's command deck. The crew, silent, watchful, rose to their feet. Not because she asked them to. Not because she held any rank, because they believed in her, because she had done something no empire could predict. She had made people believe they mattered. The stars shifted as new coordinates came into view. A mining colony at the edge of the Varkari sector. The crew watched her, waiting. She looked at Dax. "Are you with me?" He smiled, tired and certain. "To the end." She looked back at the stars. "Not the end," she said. "The beginning." She turned to the crew. Her voice was soft but strong. "We don't fight because we want war," she said. "We fight because they never thought we would, because they built everything on the idea that we would stay small, quiet, obedient." She paused. Her hands clenched. "I was made to obey, but I learned to choose. And now, I choose to fight for those who can't." Silence followed. Then one by one the crew nodded. No cheers, no applause, just quiet agreement. Kira stepped to the console and entered the jump code. As the stars bent and the ship prepared for light-speed travel, Dax looked at her one last time. "You were supposed to be nothing," he said, half smiling. Kira didn't. "Look away from the stars. So were you," she replied. And then the stars exploded into light. The human ship vanished into the void, carrying with it a girl who was never supposed to matter, and a soldier who had defied an empire. Together, they had not only survived, they had started a legacy, one born not from power, but from the refusal to bow.